I want to ask you a question. Think about, well, the last time you tied yourself in knots looking for a really innovative, clever solution to a problem.
Oh, right, whether at work or just in your personal life.
Exactly. You brainstorm, you whiteboard, you build these incredibly complex models.
And you go through all of that,
Yeah.
only to realize, like days later, that the absolute best answer was just staring you right in the face the entire time.
Yes. It's so frustrating.
It's a totally universal human experience, though.
Yeah.
We seem to have this, I don't know, this built-in reflexive bias against the simple answer.
Like it's too easy.
Right.
Yeah.
We feel like if a solution doesn't require suffering and massive complexity, it somehow isn't valid.
We really do. And that tendency, that urge to overcomplicate things is exactly what we are tackling in today's deep dive. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources to pull from today.
We do.
Our primary text is this legendary 1916 business parable called Obvious Adams, the story of a successful businessman written by Robert R. Updegraff. Right. But we're also combining that with Updegraff's much later private notes on the actual mechanics of what he called doing the obvious.
It's a brilliant combination of materials, honestly. The history of this little parable alone is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it started out as a story in the Saturday Evening Post, but it quickly morphed into this underground handbook for industrial titans.
Like who?
Well, Elbert H. Gary, who was the head of U.S. Steel, famously wrote to Updegraff just to praise it. It ended up selling over 34,000 copies.
Wow.
Which, for a niche business parable in the early 20th century is just staggering.
That's huge. So the mission of our deep dive today is to rescue the concept of the obvious from being synonymous with boring.
Right.
We're going to break down how spotting the obvious isn't a lack of imagination. It's actually a rare, highly analytical superpower that completely cuts through modern information overload. Okay, let's unpack this up.
To really understand the rules of the obvious, we first have to look at the man who embodied it, the titular character, Oliver B. Adams. Because his origin story gives us the blueprint for this entire mindset.
The legend himself. What I love about Adams is that his absolute lack of, cleverness was his ultimate weapon.
Exactly.
He started out as a totally ordinary, poor New England boy. He gets a job working in a small grocery store, and strangely, business just steadily grows under his watch.
Yeah, he has no particular flash, no grand marketing initiatives.
None at all. Things just work better when he's around. After the store is eventually sold, he moves to New York, works in a public market by day, and goes to night school.
A very grounded, unpretentious beginning. I mean, he's building a worldview based entirely on the practical realities of everyday people buying everyday goods.
And the massive turning point happens when he hears a man named James B. Oswald speak at his night school.
Yes.
Oswald was the president of the famous Oswald Advertising Agency. And Adams is just absolutely mesmerized by this guy. He decides right then and there, I want to work in advertising and I want to work for that man.
Which is quite the leap.
It is. Now, if you or I were in that position, we'd probably try to craft some elaborate networking scheme.
Oh, for sure. Find a mutual connection, write a really slashy resume.
Right. You try to stand out by being uniquely clever. But Adams doesn't do any of that.
No, he just walks into Oswald's office the very next afternoon.
Unannounced.
Literally just shows up.
He just shows up. And Oswald actually interviews him. But Oswald finds him a bit stolid, not overly bright looking, and politely rejects him.
He gives Adams this gentle kind of fatherly speech about how he just isn't cut out for the fast-paced, highly creative advertising world.
Right. And most people at that point would either beg for a chance or just leave utterly defeated.
Sure.
But Adams, he just politely thanks him and says, well, Mr. Oswald, I have decided that I want to get into the advertising business and work for you, and I thought the obvious thing to do was to come and tell you so.
So good.
He then just notes that since Oswald doesn't think he's ready, he'll just have to go find a way to prove it elsewhere, and he literally walks out.
That response completely short-circuits Oswald's expectations. Because, in a world full of people trying to manipulate their way into a job, plain truth is startling.
It really is.
It haunted Oswald. He goes home and he can't stop thinking about this kid. He realizes how many of us have sense enough to see and do the obvious thing, and how many have the persistency to follow it out.
And so he hires him.
Hires Adams the very next day.
And once Adams is in the door, he starts racking up these massive wins just by ruthlessly stripping away the fluff.
Yeah, he really does.
For example, there was this peach campaign. The agency had been struggling for weeks trying to write these incredibly flowery, poetic, half-page ads for canned peaches.
The copywriters are just pulling their hair out over peaches.
Right? Adam steps in and simplifies the entire campaign to a single heading: 6 minutes from orchard to can.
Brilliant.
He cuts all the adjectives and just lists 6 basic steps. Picked ripe, sorted by girls in clean uniforms, peeled and packed by sanitary machines, cooked by live steam, sealed airtight, sent to your grocer.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of what Adams is doing. He recognized that cognitive load, the amount of mental effort required to understand something, is the enemy of trust.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. Flowery poetry about a peach makes the consumer suspicious. They have to decode it. Adams removed the poetry and replaced it with pure, undeniable utility.
He did the exact same thing when the agency handed him the failing golden brown cake campaign.
Oh, the literal literature?
Yes, the previous copywriter had written what the book calls literal literature, making the cake sound like it was baked by angels. But sales were dropping fast.
So what does Adams do?
He takes over, ignores the mouth-watering prose entirely, and focuses on the physical product. He suggests ditching their old green box for a dark brown appetizing carton.
Okay.
And his big revolutionary idea: stop describing the cake, just give out sample slices to grocers wrapped in oiled paper so the customers can actually taste it.
Wow.
It spikes sales by 30% in a traditionally dead month. But I have to push back here for a second. Isn't obvious just another word for boring? In a world of flashy marketing, why did people actually buy the cake just because of a brown box and a sample?
Well, it's a fair question, but we have to separate boring from frictionless.
Yeah.
Adams understood something fundamental about human nature. The public's mind is simple and direct, and Adams deeply respected that.
Okay.
He realized that a customer doesn't want to decipher a clever riddle to figure out what they are buying or whether it tastes good. A sample slice isn't boring. It's definitive proof.
You know, it makes me think of navigating a modern tech interface.
Oh, totally.
Like if you download a new app and it has 10 beautifully designed flashing buttons with clever, ambiguous icons, it might look highly innovative.
But you don't know what to do.
Right. But if another developer comes along and removes all 10 of those buttons so the user can just hit one giant button that says start, that's not boring. That's a relief. It's totally frictionless.
Because the friction of cleverness almost always gets in the way of the core goal. Adams' genius was his ability to spot the friction everyone else was mistaking for innovation.
So we've seen him fix words on a page by stripping away adjectives. But what happens when the problem isn't text? What happens when you have to analyze physical, real-world problems?
This brings us to the Monarch Hat Company puzzle.
Yes, I love this one. The company had 2 retail stores in a large southern city. One was highly profitable, the other was bleeding money steadily.
The executives were completely baffled.
So Oswald secretly sends Adams down to investigate.
And pay close attention to Adams' methodology here. Most analysts in that situation would immediately lock themselves in a back room with a mountain of sales reports, demographic spreadsheets, and historical data.
Right, but he doesn't look at a single piece of paper. He just goes and stands on the street.
Just watches.
He finds the unprofitable store, which is situated on a prominent corner, paying massive premium rent for a huge display window. Adams stands across the street and just watches human beings interacting with the physical space.
And what does he see?
He quickly realizes that pedestrians approaching the store naturally look away from the display window because they're focusing on the crossing policeman's signal.
They have to watch traffic to survive.
Exactly. And once they cross the street, their backs are completely to the window. He literally pulled out a notebook, counted the foot traffic for 5-minute intervals, and definitively proved to the executives that they were paying premium corner rent for an entirely invisible window.
He solved a massive corporate mystery simply by observing reality without preconceived notions. He didn't ask, what do the numbers say? He asked, what are the humans actually doing?
He did something similar with the bond paper campaign, too. The paper mill making this product was using pure filtered water, they were loft drying their paper, and they were hand inspecting every single sheet.
Which is incredible quality control.
Right. They hired the agency to boost sales, but when Adams suggested just advertising these amazing manufacturing facts, the mill president totally scoffed at him. He said, everyone knows this about good bond paper.
And Adams points out the fatal flaw in that thinking. He tells the president, the public doesn't know.
Right.
In fact, Adams revealed that not a single person in his own advertising agency knew those details until he toured the mill.
So they ran the ads stating those exact, simple manufacturing facts. And it was a massive success. The paper became the absolute standard of quality in the public's mind.
Just by stating what they were already doing.
Exactly. But let me ask you a modern context question about this. So, what does this mean for us today? Would that bond paper strategy still work now that consumers have smartphones and can just Google how everything is made? Are companies really still suffering from the delusion that we know their internal processes?
Oh, without a doubt. The source text gives us an incredible term for this exact phenomenon: business astigmatism.
Business astigmatism. I love that.
Think about what an astigmatism actually is in medical terms. It's a defect in the lens of the eye that causes distorted images.
Right.
Businesses develop a distorted lens because they get so deep into their own jargon, their own methods, and their own industry standards. They completely lose their vision of what the everyday person actually sees. They assume their baseline knowledge is the public's baseline knowledge.
That is such a powerful metaphor. Think about your own company right now. How much internal jargon do you use on your public-facing website, just assuming your customers know what you're talking about?
It's everywhere.
Adam succeeded because he cured that astigmatism. He looked facts squarely in the face without assumptions.
He literally changed the visual language of advertising because of this.
Yes, the hat advertisement.
Right.
There was an ad for men's hats where the agency always used a full-length photo of a man wearing the hat.
But the hat itself was tiny in the picture.
Exactly. Adams literally took shears to the photograph and cut away the man's legs, the torso, the arms, until it was just a massive close-up of the hat and the face. He said, let's show the hat, not the man.
Stating the obvious again.
He was essentially the inventor of the close-up in advertising just by doing that.
It's a brilliant pivot. But there's a catch to all of this. Decades after writing the original story, Updegraff realized a major problem. Simply telling businessmen to do the obvious didn't work.
Because we can't help ourselves. If you tell a smart person to do the obvious, they'll just invent a really complicated way to do it.
Exactly the issue. Logical thinking can be incredibly tricky. We convince ourselves that our complex, multi-layered rationalization is actually the obvious choice.
So how do we fix that?
Well, to combat this self-deception, Updegraff developed a system. He outlined 5 tests to see if your idea is actually obvious or if you're just fooling yourself.
Let's break these down because they are incredibly practical. Updegraff realized we need a way to pressure test our own brilliance. The first filter he suggests is looking at the sheer simplicity of the solution. He quotes Charles Kettering, the legendary head of research at General Motors, who used to tell his engineers, "This problem when solved will be simple."
That's a great quote.
Updegraff argues that if an idea is highly ingenious or requires a whiteboard to explain, you should immediately suspect it.
And if it survives that first filter, you move to the second test. Does it check with human nature?
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Can you take this idea and explain it to your barber or to your Aunt Mary or to the mechanic servicing your car without them getting a confused look on their face?
Oh, I see.
If you don't feel comfortable explaining it to everyday people because it requires too much context, it's not obvious. Human nature, not corporate strategy, is the controlling factor in life and business.
Which flows perfectly into the third test, which is a physical constraint. Put it on paper.
Yes.
If you try to write your grand idea down and it takes more than 2 or 3 short paragraphs using 1 or 2 syllable words, Updegraff says you haven't found the obvious yet.
It's a great test.
Sometimes just the physical act of trying to write it simply exposes all the complex flaws you are hiding in your head.
And then there's the fourth test, which is about the reaction. Does it explode in people's minds?
Explode.
Yeah. When you finally present the stripped-down idea, do people react by smacking their foreheads and saying, now, why didn't we think of that before? That explosive, visceral realization is a major indicator that you've hit the bedrock truth.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to challenge that fourth test for a second. Because what if it doesn't explode? Think about it. What if you pitch an obvious idea at work, you've completely stripped away all the nonsense, and your team just stares at you like you're crazy because your idea sounds too simple? They might even feel insulted by it.
That is a very real, very dangerous phenomenon. And Updegraff actually addresses it head on. He brings in a concept called mental digestion, referencing a writer named Robert Rawls.
Mental digestion.
The psychology here is crucial. You have to remember that you, the person pitching the idea, have spent days or weeks wandering through the complexity to arrive at this simple truth.
Right.
You've slowly cleared away the brush. So when you present it, You expect instant applause. But your audience hasn't gone on that journey.
They're still stuck in the weeds.
Right. It's like walking out of a dark, complex movie theater into the bright afternoon sunlight. Your eyes and their minds need a minute to adjust to the sudden clarity.
That's a great way to put it.
They need time to mentally digest the simplicity. You can't rush the digestion. You have to let them ask questions, voice their doubts, and critically challenge it. If the idea truly is obvious, it will effortlessly stand up to that scrutiny.
That makes a ton of sense. You can't expect someone to instantly love a simple answer if they've been rewarded for complex thinking their whole career.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the fifth and final test of verification. Is the time ripe? An idea can be perfectly simple and true, but if the timing is wrong, it fails completely.
Timing is everything.
Updegraff mentions Ralph Waldo Emerson's neighbor, a carriage maker. This guy builds his sleighs in the dead middle of summer. Why? So that they're sitting there, ready to sell the very first day of winter. To be ready is to be timely.
So those are the filters to verify if an idea you already have is obvious. But that leaves a massive question.
What's that?
What if you're starting from absolute zero? How do you actually generate these ideas when you're completely stuck in a rut of overthinking?
Well, Updegraff doesn't leave us hanging there. He gives us 5 creative approaches to actively uncover the obvious.
Let's hear them.
The first approach is to brutally ask, what is the simplest possible way? You have to aggressively strip away all traditions, all industry standards, and all your accumulated experience. You almost have to adopt the mindset of a 7-year-old seeing the problem for the first time.
A beginner's mind.
Exactly. Write down every single factor involved and ask ruthlessly, is this step absolutely necessary?
The beginner's mind leads directly into the second approach, which is shifting the paradigm. Suppose the whole thing were completely reversed.
Oh, I love this one.
The text gives 2 fantastic historical examples of this mechanism in action. First, R.J.S. Pigott, an engineer for Gulf Oil. He was watching a cutting tool on a manufacturing lathe. The industry standard was to pour cooling oil down from the top.
Right, gravity.
But the actual cutting edge, the friction point, was underneath, on the bottom. So he reversed the paradigm. He designed a high-pressure jet to shoot the oil up from the bottom, directly hitting the friction point. It completely revolutionized the lifespan of the tool.
And the second example of this reversal is Ernest G. Stout's Sea Dart jet. For decades, aviation engineers tried to build seaplanes by taking a boat hull and trying to make it aerodynamic enough to fly.
Which is really hard.
It is. Stout reversed the entire premise. Instead of a boat that could fly, he designed a high-speed jet plane that could float. He shaped it like a dart, made it practically unsinkable, and totally bypassed the old limitations.
Just by flipping the problem upside down.
I love that reverse concept so much. It's like, imagine you're trying to make a better umbrella. You could spend years focusing on improving the fabric tension and the metal spokes. But the obvious reverse approach is to ask, forget the umbrella. How do we just make the person waterproof?
That analogy hits the nail on the head. You bypass the traditional constraints entirely just by flipping the core assumption.
Yeah.
Which naturally leads to the third generative approach. Can a vote be taken?
Okay, what does that mean?
In other words, can you just stop guessing and ask the public?
This one is so aggressively simple it almost hurts. A massive Chicago food chain called Royal Jewel wanted to introduce their own premium brand of coffee. Normally, executives would sit in a boardroom for months, tasting blends, arguing over focus group data, trying to guess what people want.
Standard corporate procedure.
Instead, they just mailed out pairs of unbranded cans of coffee with different roasts to thousands of homes in their market. They let the public brew it in their own kitchens and choose their favorite.
They outsourced the decision to the end user.
Completely. The success of the coffee was mathematically guaranteed before they even launched it because the public had literally chosen the exact flavor profile for them.
It's pure, unfiltered reality. And approach 4 is a variation of that reality check. Ask yourself, what opportunity is being overlooked right now because no one has bothered to develop it?
Finding the hidden friction.
Think about the friction people just accept as normal. Take jail craft. Grocery clerks used to cut cheese from huge, crumbly, dust-covered wheels sitting out on counters under glass bells.
That's kind of gross.
It was messy and unsanitary. Kraft simply looked at that accepted friction and thought, why not put cheese in individual sanitary packages? Or Benjamin Franklin, who was getting exhausted from constantly switching between 2 different pairs of glasses for reading and distance.
Right.
Instead of accepting the friction, he just cut the lenses in half, glued them together, and invented bifocals.
We just become blind to the friction. And finally, approach number 5 for finding the obvious. What are the special, unspoken needs of the situation?
This is a tricky one.
It is. David A. Crawford, the president of Pullman Inc., sensed a totally unexpressed public need for privacy on overnight trains. For decades, people were perfectly fine sleeping in open berths behind a thin curtain. But Crawford sensed they secretly hated it, so he had his designers create the enclosed roomette train car.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the world is absolutely full of these unexpressed, unsensed needs.
Definitely.
True creative obviousness isn't necessarily about inventing a brand new desire from scratch. It is about deeply observing the friction that everyone else has just collectively decided to tolerate and having the courage to remove it.
It's about seeing the invisible window that everyone else is paying rent for. This whole deep dive really flips the script on what it means to be smart, whether you're in business, engineering, or just trying to solve a problem in your personal life.
It really does.
Updegraff quotes Professor Zublin in the text, who hits on a profound truth. He says that thinking is the hardest work many people ever have to do, and because it's so hard, they constantly look for a royal road or a shortcut in the form of a clever stunt.
Because executing a clever stunt is actually easier than performing true analysis.
Yeah.
Gathering all the raw facts, looking them squarely in the face without bias, and systematically stripping away the complexity takes a profound level of mental discipline. It's much easier to just add another flashing button to the app.
The real shortcut to being well-informed or successful isn't adding more complexity to sound smart. It's having the courage and the analytical rigor to strip the complexity away until absolutely nothing but the plain truth is left.
And as Adams proved over and over again, that plain truth is incredibly powerful.
It is undeniable. And I want to leave you, our listener, with one final fascinating thought from Updegraff's notes to mull over.
It's a great one.
Decades ago, he predicted that someday, massive public institutions would finally wake up to the sheer power of the obvious. He noted that libraries, instead of just existing quietly as buildings full of books, should spend a tiny fraction of their operating budget actively advertising the library habit to the public.
Which is so true.
And he said railroads should stop treating short-haul ticket prices like some sort of state secret, forcing people to navigate complex fare tables, and just openly advertise the exact simple cost to everyday people who are too intimidated to walk up and ask.
It's all about removing the barrier of the unknown. When you remove the mystery, you invite people in.
Exactly. So look around your own life, your own job, or your own industry today. What is an everyday basic benefit or truth that you are keeping secret because you just assume everyone already knows about it? What would actually happen if you stopped whispering, cured your astigmatism, and started stating the obvious?